Okay, so we're on to France. We're going to be doing French regionals today. But first, we have to feed our sour. And I've been feeding mine along here, and I gave it a name. I always like to name my sour. They say in the old world, it's good luck to name it. So this sour's name is Irving. We're going to take a little bit of Irving. Don't need much. I've got 50 grams of water here. And I'm just going to take probably the equivalent of about a teaspoon or so of Irving. And I'm just going to mix them with the water. Then we're going to zero out our scale. And we're going to put in about 50 grams of flour just to make things even. The feed is almost always the same. It's almost always 100% hydration. When I'm getting ready to make a sourdough bread, if I wanted to make more sour than just 100 grams, all I'd have to do is just still make the sour feed at 1:1. So if it called for, let's say, 2 pounds of sour to be added to a larger batch of bread, I would add a pound of water and a pound of flour and a little bit of my sour culture, and it will grow. Some people will grow their sour before making bread for 4 hours. Other people will do it for 8. Other people will even grow it overnight and let it really grow. I tend to do it overnight, usually about 12 hours, to get the sour fed and ready and primed for a new batch of bread. But for maintenance like this, I don't like to have to throw a lot away. So I just use a small container. This little bit will keep this sour alive if we keep feeding it. So Irving has been fed. I'll put this container out on the counter overnight to grow, and we'll feed it tomorrow. The rest of Irving, regrettably, is going to go in the trash. Now, of course, with the bread we're making today, we could very easily add Irving to our bread. The bread we're making is a French regional breads, which essentially is like a baguette dough that has been being formed into shapes that are very common in the French countryside. Every baker had their own signature, and still does for the most part. We have flour, yeast, salt, some water, and in this, to make the bread a little softer, I'm adding a little bit of olive oil to it. This recipe is up on the Talent system for you. I'm just going to go ahead and mix these together just to make sure that the yeast is well distributed throughout the flour. And we're going to add our water. And we're going to add our olive oil. We're just going to bring this on together. This is about a 2-pound batch. What this will do is it'll give you enough dough to be able to make a couple of different styles of French regional breads. On the Talent system, you are going to find a lot of different photographs and handouts that we would normally give out in class that give you visual pictures and directions on the different types of shapes that you can make. There are lots of different styles. In order to be distinctive and to stand out amongst the competition, all bakers wanted to make sure that their bread looked unique and had a unique quality to it. Gave it something that was distinctly different than their competition. Every French village had at least one bakery, if not several. Larger villages obviously could support several bakeries, but then there would be an understandable certain amount of competition going on between the bakers. And some bakers would specialize. Some bakers would specialize more in desserts and sweet things, like a patisserie, and others would focus on bread, which would be referred to as a boulangerie. These are all typical of bakers of the region, and they are, fiercely competitive, but they The French people eat a lot of bread, so there's no worry. There's work enough for everybody. All right, so this dough is going to come together. And as I knead it, I'm going to use the slap and fold method. This really gets this more wet type of dough going really nicely. And as the gluten develops, it will start to separate itself from the board. And it'll become more and more cohesive. So you just have to be persistent about this. It's going to take probably about 12 minutes or so of just constant kneading to get this dough to get smooth and supple. Right now it's rather shaggy. It's referred to as a shaggy mass. But just like in a mixer, if you were using a mixer, you would mix this until it starts to clean up the bowl. Well, in the case of hand mixing, we're going to go ahead and do it until it cleans up the board. And it will. The gluten wants to stick to itself. It wants to form a cohesive mass as it starts to form. It doesn't really want to stick to you or to the board. I like the slap and fold technique, especially for wetter doughs. Doughs that are more sticky. And as you can see, this is still pretty sticky. But as it starts to gather together and starts to form gluten, and the gluten becomes more developed, you'll see less and less stickiness. Okay, so now we're going to let this dough sit for about 20 minutes. We're going to come back, we're going to give it a fold, and then we're going to let it ferment for another 20 minutes, and then we're going to come back and give it another fold, and then finally we're going to let it sit for 15 minutes, and we'll be ready to pre-shape this dough. As I say, we're going to be using a multitude of different shapes. I'm going to form a couple of different French regional shapes that I really like, and take a look at all the documents I have up there about different types of French regional shapes. See which ones attract you, which ones are most that you gravitate toward, and then you can use those to make. You can use this dough to make those. This is about 2 pounds of dough, so I'm going to probably get about 2 nice loaves, and so we'll be back in about 20 minutes in order to see the fold. Okay, time for the first fold. 15 or 20 minutes has gone by, and I'm going to wet my hands. It's always good to keep a little bit of water nearby. The dough won't stick to you if your hands are wet. Now, for illustration purposes, we'll bring it right out here onto the bench so you can see what's going on. But with wet hands, you're going to want to take your dough, stretch, and fold. So from the top, stretch and fold from the bottom. Come and stretch and fold from the left. And stretch and fold from the right. So north, south, east, and west. And you can see how the dough is getting smoother and more supple just from the process of folding. Folding does 4 main things to the dough. It's going to strengthen the gluten, it's going to redistribute the temperature, redistribute the yeast, and it will slightly degas the dough. So the big bubbles that are overly large will pop. All of those are good things for your dough. So we're going to come back in 20 more minutes to fold again. All right, so time for another fold. 20 minutes has gone by. Wet the fingers. This time we'll just do it right in the bowl. So pull it up, fold it over, pull it up again from the other side, fold it over, and fold it over from the left, spin it around, and fold it over from the right. And then just flip it on over. It's looking pretty good. Now we'll give it a 15-minute rest, and we'll be ready to do our pre-shaping on it. Okay, so there are many different styles of French regional loaves, and we can choose any one of a number of them. I'm going to do a couple of different ones today. I'll put down a little bit of flour. This dough is a little on the sticky side. Throw a little flour on top just to make this a little easier to handle. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to make two different loaves here. So I'm going to start by just sort of dividing this into 2. And we're going to start off with what's referred to as a tabatier. And the tabatier, it means a tobacco pouch. At one time, every man in France probably smoked a pipe, and they had a tobacco pouch. So we're going to take this piece of dough here, and I'm going to take the pretty side, put it down, and I'm just going to bring these sides into the middle, just pinching them into the center, giving them a chance to all form sort of a belly button in the center. We're going to turn it over, and we're just going to gently round this up, just sort of pre-shaping it round. And all I'm doing here is just pulling it along the board, and it's causing the outer skin to get nice and snug, nice and tight. Okay, so to make a tabatier, what we're going to do is we're going to take part of this loaf, we're going to roll it on out. So I'm going to take about half of it, give or take about half of it. And I pressed a little too hard. Let's get some flour on there. I'm going to be gentle here. I'm going to be a little more gentle this time. I'm going to take part of this though, part of this loaf. We're going to roll it on out like a long tongue. Leaving this part of the loaf intact. All right, this thing's stuck down pretty good. Get a scraper. Anytime your dough sticks, you can force some flour underneath it with a bench scraper. To brush off excess flour, because this is going to come up and you're going to flap it over. So I'm going to take my hand and wet it. I'm going to moisten this area over here on this part of the loaf, because when this comes over, I want it to stick. So what we have here is something that resembles a little tobacco pouch. It's stuck pretty well in the middle here, but the edges are free. And then once this bakes, and as it proofs and as it bakes, these edges will curl upward and it'll look very much like a traditional tobacco pouch. Very popular type of loaf called a tabatier. All right, so the next one I'm going to do, I think, and you'll see it in the handouts, is called a Rosary Crown. With this pound of dough, I'm going to take a chunk of this dough and set it aside. We're going to use that to make the rosary. For the rest of this dough, we're going to form it into something that is similar to a short, stubby baguette. So I'm just going to roll this over and give it a good pinch. Seal it along its edge. If things start sticking on you, just sort of get your hands covered with flour. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and roll it out just a little bit. I don't want to roll it out too far, but I'm going to put some flour down here because this is really wanting to stick. Now, the key with this Rosary Crown is we're going to need to have a place to put the rosary. So we're going to take our rolling pin and put it right here in the center, and we're going to press down. And that's going to create a groove. I'm going to bring that groove together. If you have excess flour in there, you can always knock it out a little bit. But what makes it a crown is we're going to turn it into a crescent like that. Now we're going to set this aside, and we'll address that in a minute. In the meantime, we're going to take what we were going to make our rosary out of and gently flatten it down. I'm going to roll it over like I'm making a little mini baguette loaf. Just going to kind of seal that shut to make a strand. Now we're going to roll this out just a little bit. I want it to be long enough to fit in this groove. And we're going to take the edge of our pinky. I'm going to roll this. I'm assisting it here with my left hand to help it roll along with it. What I'm doing here is I'm creating a thin spot with my pinky. And you'll feel it when it gets thin. What we're doing is we're making beads, little pearl beads. These are the kind of beads you would see on a rosary. And you can tell with these French regional loaves, when you really look at the pictures, they're really simple to make. After all, if they were too difficult or if they were too complicated and took too much time, nobody would bother. It just takes too much time. Time is money in the world of baking. We have to use our time wisely. We have other things to do. Okay, so with my pinky, I've made a rosary. If you have excess flour, I'm just going to moisten this. And place my rosary on top of the crown. And these are going to proof together. And as they do, this rosary will stand right out. Alright, so there you can see the two loaves I have, Tabata and a Rosary Crown. Just to make sure things don't stick too much, and dust these with a little bit of flour. Cover them up with plastic, and they need to proof. In a proof box, a commercial proof box, we'd probably be able to proof them in about half an hour, but because we're at room temperature, I suspect it's going to take more like an hour. So I'm going to go ahead and come back in an hour, and we'll pick up where we left off. Okay, an hour has passed, and I think these are ready. You can see if we press in, my finger mark is pushing out, but very slowly. Exactly what I want to see. I have in the oven, I have set at 450 degrees. I have a pot, just a standard saucepan, full of hot water. Brought the water to a boil. I put it down on the bottom shelf so that it's providing some just gentle steam. In order to help facilitate that, I'm just going to give this a little spritz just to make sure it has a little more moisture on it, but we're going to put this in the oven, probably 20-25 minutes, probably 25. We're going to reach a 200-degree internal temperature, and these will be done, and I'll bring them back for you guys to look at. Turn it very nice. Very, very hot. Tabata, pulled away just nicely. These are going to make nice loaves. Looking forward to seeing yours. Go ahead and make up 2 pounds of dough. Make your own country French regionals, and see what kind of things you'd like to try. Looking forward to seeing your posts.